This is Eric Alexander, Six Arrows Consulting. And a lot of the videos I do, when I shoot them from my office, I've got as a background behind me bookshelves. And one of the things I do and have done for years in my life is read and collect books and all different kinds of genres I enjoy. I enjoy biographies, military history, murder mysteries, theology, leadership, lots of different kinds of things. And I've collected a fair number of those through the years. I brought a few with me today. It made for some heavy carry-ons as I flew up here. But many people know that those that have worked with me, I'm not necessarily the one that's on the cutting edge of technology, although I am a big fan of technology, especially 15th century technology, the printing press. I've also, through the years, become a fan of old books. And there's a prominent writer that's been influential in my life that got me started down that path. So let me just point you to that for a minute. The writer is C.S. Lewis, and so I've read a variety of his things, but one of the things that got me headed down this direction of old books is a preface he did to a book by Saint Athanasius on the Incarnation. Let me just read a few excerpts from the preface. One is, there is a strange idea abroad that in every subject, the ancient books should be read only by the professionals, and that the amateur should content himself with the modern books. Now, he's talking mainly about theology and philosophy and things like that. And yes, I'm definitely an amateur in those topics, but he says, even for amateurs, there's some benefit to reading the old books. Like Athanasius, that's 4th century, that's definitely old. And here's another quote. It is a good rule, after reading a new book, never to allow yourself another new one till you have read an old one in between. If that is too much for you, you should at least read one old book to every 3 new ones. I don't necessarily follow that rule, but based on his encouragement there, I have been reading some old books. I've been reading some old theology books, and struggling through an old book right now, 18th century, with a friend from church, and getting some benefit out of it. But so I'm understanding what he talks about. One more quote here that's helpful. Reading the old books can keep the clean sea breeze of the centuries blowing through our minds, and this can be done only by reading old books. So, reading old books. As I mentioned, theology, I've not read so much philosophy, but I've found that reading the old books has been helpful. And on most of the ones that I've been reading are on theology, but I've also found some old wisdom on leadership. So in my professional life, and I'm paying attention to leadership, I'm paying attention to business, and I've found some useful resources. Of course, scripture is full of all kinds of wisdom about leadership. But in the business world, what qualifies as old is not necessarily 4th century. I've not been able to find lots of books from the 4th century about business, but there is one author that kind of qualifies as old in the life cycle of modern business. Yes, there are lots of really good modern resources, more recent resources on leadership in business. Stephen Covey, Stephen M.R. Covey, John Maxwell, Robert Gates. There are lots of other more recent books that have been really helpful for me. But an older book that's been helpful, an older author who passed away here several years ago, is Peter Drucker. And when I was a young professional, there was an executive who looked at me and said, there's an author I think you ought to check out. There's a book that I think would be helpful to you. And it was Drucker's book from the mid-60s, The Effective Executive. So I discovered that about 30 years ago, and it was influential in my life. Read it back then, and then I found Drucker's magnum opus from almost exactly 50 years ago, and discovered it and went through it about 20 years ago, his book on management. Now, sometimes people say, hey, leadership's more important than management. I think the two are so closely related. Drucker is full of wisdom about business, about management, about leadership, and principles that apply in lots of different places. So this is old by modern standards, but the wisdom is timeless. And I just wanted to point to a few things that stand out to me. I won't flip through all the pages. I've written down here on paper some of the things that stand out to me from that book. So let me just give you some excerpts of Peter Drucker's wisdom. Management is tasks, management is a discipline, but management is also people. Then he goes on, Another topic, what people mean by bureaucracy, and he gives some wisdom about bureaucracy, how not to create it, how to deal with it. What people mean by bureaucracy and rightly condemn is a management that has come to misconceive itself as an end and the institution as a means, and he calls it a degenerative disease. Here's another one. The right answers are always right in retrospect. The right answers are the result of asking the right questions. That's really useful when we're trying to solve problems, when we're doing strategic planning. What are the questions we should be asking? How about this one? Speaking of strategy, the future will not just happen if one wishes hard enough. It requires decision now. It imposes risk now. It requires action now. It demands allocation of resources and, above all, of human resources now. It requires work now. A couple more. The book goes on for like 800 pages, so we'll just touch a few things. It is a law of governance that governance and governing bodies restrict themselves to the necessary decisions. Any governing body will be the more effective and more powerful the more it eschews decisions it does not have to make. Lots of practical wisdom there. Had some conversations with some leadership teams and boards about that very topic recently. And here's one more. Managing means making the strengths of people effective. So much to delve into there. We won't take time for it. Just letting you know, I've found some old resources really helpful for me in my growth. I'd encourage you to dig into some of these older resources too. Don't ignore the new ones. Doesn't necessarily need to be one old one for every new one, but the idea of looking for wisdom in whatever decade or century you can find it makes a lot of sense to me. It's something to think about. Thanks for listening.